You had mentioned, I think, by 2030 that we're going to need to have an additional 40% increase in our access in energy production, et cetera. And then you also mentioned that, some folks have suggested that one of our ways of dealing with our need for energy is to dramatically raise taxes. And I think Tom Friedman of the New York Times, and I believe Al Gore as well, and some others have sort of, in the past, advocated that point of view, that we need to just tax it so that it makes it even more painful than it is now to buy gas or whatever our needs are. Would you tell us why that's not a good idea?
Well, I think what I was struck by was the fact I thought it was rather non-controversial to say that you're trying to keep the lights on and you're trying to keep the rates down. Now, that, to me, I didn't see there's a whole lot that folks could object to that. But I found from this one reporter that was the case. Now, he wasn't talking about raising taxes. He just talking about raising rates. And one of his objections was to the Rural Utility Service and under the Farm Bill was the fact that it helped us in rural America keeping the rates down. Now, he ignored completely the fact that about 60% of all the co-ops have rates already higher than the neighbor and investor-owned utility. He didn't care about that. He ignored the fact that we've got about half of all the electric cooperatives out there in this country serving three-quarters of the landmass of this nation that, in fact, today have more than the national average as far as people living under the poverty line. So you got some of the poorest people in this country. His deal is the only solution, the only way to deal with the whole question of greenhouse gases and carbon emissions is to raise rates. Now, I don't think that's right. And I'd be very surprised if the Congress decided to go down that path. Instead, what it's going to take every tool that we have at hand. It's going to take renewables. It's going to take more efficiency. It's going to take technology with regard to coal, because we're going to have to continue to use coal. That's the reality. MIT's even saying that you're going to have coal to meet that 40% increase we got. We're going to have carbon capture and storage. And that's expected to be commercially available where we can incorporate in our power plants by the year 2020, and we need to do that. We need to also build more nuclear plants. We're going to have to do that. That's one way we can get at that. In fact, we need about 3 times the number of nuclear plants that we have on hand today. We need plug-in automobiles to help reduce this, but you got to have the power for those plug-ins, and so we got to have more power to do all this, and we need distributed generation. We need all this stuff. And I think that's what I was saying, that we need a plan here. Mm-hmm. We've got some conflicting objectives that we want to get. We want to reduce carbon emissions. We want to move toward energy independence. We want to make sure small businesses out there that are going to give us that hope of reducing our dependence on foreign energy. Namely, we've got, 112 ethanol plants out there and about 30-some-odd biodiesel plants. Those are small businesses. Our rates go through the roof. Big bunch of those biodiesel plants and ethanol plants are going under. There's just no way they can make it. So somewhere here, we got to reject this simplicity that the only answer is to raise rates. I guarantee you our rates are going to be going up enough to take care of any desires about anybody has, because this is going to be the most expensive power that we have to add that we've ever had in the history of not only electric co-ops, but the entire country and the entire industry. So that's where I think all this stuff comes down to. Do we rely on technology and developing technology and making our investment there, or do we go over here and say, well, we'll take a simple rate and we'll just jack the rates up so high that people have to conserve and they'll have to be more efficient? Now, what that does to the economy of this nation, it drives it into the tank. It destroys rural America, it destroys small business, and it doesn't make any sense at all. But there are people, believe it or not, that are out there advocating that.
Thank you. Mr. Bias, and I think I used a lot of my time. If I have some left. Mr. Bias, if I could go to you next then. You had mentioned about the very positive impact that ethanol has had in the rural community, agriculture, et cetera. Now, there's also the other side to some degree, that being, number one, it takes a lot of energy in order to produce ethanol, is my understanding as well. And so that's something that has to be dealt with to some degree. And in addition to that, obviously, it drives up the price of of feeding cattle, for example, and the consumers at the store when they're purchasing the food for their families, et cetera. It drives those up. So all of this has two sides, and if you could sort of address that issue as well.
I'd be glad to, Congressman. Thank you. Number one, on the energy efficiency of ethanol. When this began 30-some years ago, I was working for my United States Senator in Indiana who actually chaired the first Alcohol Fuels Commission. And very frankly, it was called gasohol. It wasn't energy efficient. It wasn't economically efficient. And truth be known, our real expertise was probably backyard stills along the Ohio River on how to even produce ethanol. But we've come a long way since then. Part of it's been public policy that's driven it, but it's also that investment in technology that Glenn just referred to into the industry, and now it's energy efficient. We produce more energy than it takes to produce the ethanol. It's also economically efficient. And I know there's a lot of critics out there. We hear, well, this adversely impacts the livestock industry. Well, we're very sensitive to that. We're a general commodity organization. I mean, we have farmers that produce all kinds of commodities and heavy into cattle production. But 105 out of the last 120 months, corn has traded, and this is USDA statistics, at below the cost of production. And that means that those people who were using corn were basically being subsidized. And a lot of people look at the commodity title and say, oh, look at all that money going to those farmers. Well, actually, it was a pass-through. The subsidy was going to livestock industry. The subsidy was going to consumers. It wasn't necessarily staying in the farmers' pockets, and they weren't making a profit from the marketplace. Now that's changed. Last year, when ethanol drove prices through the roof, suddenly people said, well, you're not, now you're taking food out of people's mouths. And that, again, is not true. We're still exporting almost as much as we're using for ethanol in this country. And the other component that has to be looked at is how much percentage of that total food dollar is actually related to the raw commodity. I read where the cereal companies are all raising their prices, blaming farmers. There's a penny's worth of corn in the cornflakes box. Other cost factors, I think.
They were also blaming the high cost of gas and transporting the things around, too, which is clearly,
right.
As well as there's many factors. But
sure, if I might add, though, you know, whenever they raise those prices, when corn comes back down, you won't see cornflakes coming back down. It just doesn't happen. They stay up. So that direct relationship, and if you look over a course of the last 20 years, the farmer's share of that food dollar continues to shrink. We're paying, as consumers, the best deal of anyone in the world, less than 10% of our expendable income for food.